Okay, excellent. Like I told you before, we are going to be recording this. My name is Sebastian Harrison. I work for the Center for Creative Land Recycling. We are the Brownfield Technical Assistance Provider for the ECRG and for DTSC. And really, we're here to help at every stage of your grant and to make this a success. So at this point, you should have a C-Clear, individual assigned with your project to help you and really adapt some of this material to your project, as we approach, some of these deadlines that Natasha and Mariam are going to be talking about. So again, in just a little bit, Mariam Tasnif-Abbasi, the Brownfield Development Manager for DTSC's Office of Brownfields, is going to begin the presentation with Natasha DiPietro, our ECRG Fluxx architect, who I'm sure many of you have worked with before. So just one more time, if you could put your questions in the chat, we'll address them towards the end. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mariam.
Sebastian, and I want to thank all of you who are here today participating in this ECRGenius webinar. You guys are our first cohort of ECRG grantees. This was a new program for us. It was new money, and we really appreciate your guys' participation in our program. And everything that we're going to be talking about today, I think, is part of a program building effort for us. The reason why we need quarterly reports is because we have to provide information to our management, to the governor's office, to Cali EPA, to the legislators who brought this funding to us. And so as we go through the quarterly reports today, we will kind of walk through the different questions that we're going to ask you guys to be answering as part of this routine reporting. And I think the bottom line really is that we want to share successes. We want to share successes of all of the work that you're doing and how this money is going to be utilized in your communities. And so that's really us seeking some broader successes as well. So I did want to go ahead and start out with that. The second part of today's webinar is going to focus on our scope, schedule, and budget realignment. Part of what we did when we put out the first application that you all participated in is we asked everyone to come up with their own individual budgets. And I think that's part of the growing pains of a new grant program. We wanted to see what that universe was like. When we got all of the information, we noticed that all of our grantees have provided a lot of information that's very common. There's a lot of overlap because obviously this is all based on the way we described eligible tasks for the ECRG. So we are going to be asking everyone to go through a one-time exercise to realign their scope, schedule, and budgets that were presented in the application and incorporated into the agreements. This is going to allow us to have consistency in the information that we receive through the quarterly reports and through reimbursement requests that Natasha has already gone over with you in a previous webinar. And this is going to help us go through the review of reimbursement requests faster. It's going to get us to approval faster. And hopefully, the most important thing about this grant is getting you all paid as quickly as possible. And both of these exercises together help us with enhancing our foundation and our infrastructure as we move forward into building something a little bit better, hopefully, for ECRG Round 2. There are a bunch of different terms that we're going to be talking about today, and I wanted to kind of update you guys on this. And Natasha, I think we're having another one of those problems where I was working on something and you were working on something and it didn't sync completely. So I am going to just work off of a slide that I have differently, and we'll have that updated in the presentation when we share it with everybody.
Okay.
So for those of you who are are maybe from different departments and are not familiar, Fluxx is ECRG's online portal that we use to do a lot of our information exchange. And this includes the grantee portal, which is really a big basis of what we're going to be speaking about today. ECRG tasks are the new consistent terminology that we've come up with to define all of the ECRG work. Natasha and Jessica have developed a really fantastic table that's going to help kind of organize visually what these allowable tasks are. We have ECRG spending categories, which are a less detailed version of ECRG tasks, and that's more focused on reimbursement requests. And the other thing I wanted to bring up is that the scope, schedule, and budget table that we're going to be talking about was initially presented by you on section 9 of the application. And that's basically the section that needs to be updated based on the ECRG tasks and the ECRG spending categories. It's all going to make sense, but I just wanted to make sure that you understood some of the terms that we're going to be using. Another couple of things for you to just be reminded of, that when we're talking about fiscal years, we're talking about the state fiscal year that starts on July 1st. And because of that, our quarters are, a little bit different. So, July through September ends up being the first quarter. So just to kind of remind everybody that it's following a little bit of a different schedule because of the fiscal year. And just, I think the last thing on here is the state controller's office are the ones who are actually sending the grantee checks, and want to do a quick reminder on that. And I think with that, I'm turning it back over to Natasha.
Thanks, Miriam. My name is Natasha DiPietro, and I am the ECRG Fluxx architect, and let's go ahead and jump into it. Okay, so we're going to start with a comparison of the 3 tools that we've provided to you in Fluxx. First off is the reimbursement request or cost reimbursement form. So Miriam spoke to that briefly, and this tool allows grantees to provide documentation and request reimbursement in batches of at least $15,000. DTSC provided a training on this tool last month, and we also provided a guide that is available on our ECRG Grantee Resources webpage. So next up is the quarterly reports, which are a requirement of the ECRG agreement and will help support the effective tracking of ECRG project progress and funds. So later in this training, we'll show you where to access quarterly reports, what information is being requested, and what level of detail DTSC is expecting to see in your response. And finally, we have the scope, schedule, and budget table, which is not a new tool, as Miriam mentioned, and it was formerly known as the Budget Detail table. We're going to talk more about this shortly, but as an introduction to it, this tool will now provide a better snapshot of the project and will ultimately help with the approval of your reimbursement requests. So this slide is continuing the comparison and is now focusing on what each tool includes. So again, the reimbursement request tool asks for site name, the submitted invoice range, payment address, which again must match your standard 204, 205 forms that you submitted, a summary of costs using ECRG spending categories, and an invoice batch upload. The quarterly reports require updates about project impact, project management activities, environmental activities, community engagement, progress photos, etc. We'll go over this in detail a little bit later. And lastly, the scope, schedule, and budget table requires the ECRG task, the estimated schedule, the task status, and the associated costs allocated into the ECRG spending categories. So now that we've compared the tools that are provided to you guys in Fluxx, let's dive into the 2 that this training is centered on. So we're going to start with the ECRG scope, schedule, and budget realignment. Now, if you remember back when you completed your application, we offered a budget tool in section 9 to help you describe the activities you were requesting funds for. We've made improvements to that tool and have included a couple more fields. So the tool now encompasses details of the scope, schedule, and budget in one place. And we've also included a standard list of ECRG tasks to describe the project phases. Lastly, this will eliminate the need for attachments related to scope and schedule. So I've mentioned ECRG tasks a couple times now, and this slide presents a table of these high-level tasks based on grant type. This is meant to be a list of options for you to choose from based on, excuse me, the scope of your project. You'll notice there's a good amount of overlap between grant types, and there's some ECRG tasks that we'd like to see represented on every project. Every grantee should include regulatory oversight fees as a task, with the exception of community-wide assessment grants where regulatory oversight is not required, so it may not be applicable. Every grantee should include a grant project management task and a community engagement task. So each of these tasks will have a specific spending category that your estimates will go into. We've color-coded these tasks to indicate which ECRG spending category your estimates should go under. So on this slide, you'll see what I mean. Costs associated with regulatory oversight fees should obviously go into the regulatory oversight fee spending category. Grant project management task can be allocated to both PM project management labor and project management travel. Community or tribal engagement costs go into community engagement contracts. And as for environmental activities, you're able to choose from the ECRG tasks in orange. And for the ones that you do include, all of the costs that are associated with those tasks should go into the environmental contracts spending category. So this slide is a color-coded example of a realigned budget. In this snapshot, ECRG tasks are displayed as column headers, and these headers are dictated by what's entered by the grantee. The ECRG spending categories are displayed as row headers, and these are not editable by the grantee, so these will stay the same. So in this example, you'll notice we added a project management task, and we added funds only into the grantee project manager labor category. So the only other appropriate category you could allocate funds for this task would be PM travel. We added a regulatory oversight task, and we allocated funds to the regulatory oversight fees spending category. So last, I'd like to point out that the final 5 ECRG tasks shown in this example are all related to the environmental work, and cost for these tasks are allocated only into the environmental contracts category. So I'll pause for a minute so you can look over this example, and we're asking you as the grantee to realign your proposed scope, schedule, and budget into this format in Fluxx. This eliminates the needs for attachments and additional documents and streamlines the way you communicate your schedule and progress. Since some time has passed since completing the application, this is also a good opportunity for grantees to revisit the scope, schedule, and budget and make updates as necessary. So if there are major changes in your scope, schedule, or budget that you've not recently cleared with your portfolio manager, you're going to need to communicate those and get them approved by the portfolio manager ahead of making these changes in Fluxx. We will also be asking each grantee to schedule a 15-minute block with CClear after making these changes in Fluxx to ensure that it's been done correctly and to give you an opportunity to ask any specific questions. We'll provide a sign-up link in a follow-up email along with any presentation materials. We'll be asking that the scope, schedule, and budget realignment is completed by each grantee by mid-November. So next, I'm going to switch to Fluxx and go through exactly how we would like you to do this. Okay, so when you're ready to begin working on it, you log into your application portal, dtsc.fluxx.io, and log in using the same credentials as always. So if you don't remember your username or password, you can always reset the password on the home page. Be sure to check your spam folders. And worst case, you can always send an email to application.portal@dtsc.ca.gov. So once you're logged in, you're going to want to navigate to your active grant. And choose the correct record. So many of you will only have one active grant. Some of you will have more than one. So you'll choose the correct record. So once you're centered on the correct record, you will scroll down to section 9. And you'll scroll down to what used to be called the budget detail table, which is now called the scope, schedule, and budget table. So there are two options of the best way to go about making these changes and doing this realignment. So the first option is going to be to start from scratch and to simply add new tasks by using the green plus sign to create a new ECRG task. So now I'm going to walk through the information that we're asking for that's related to each specific task. So ECRG task description and/or document name. This is a field where you're going to enter either the name of the document or a brief description of the task. You should be able to generally understand the work that's being done by what you've entered here. In most cases, a document title would be appropriate. So the next field is a new field, and it's called ECRG task. And it's a drop-down menu, and you should recognize the options from the color-coded table that I showed earlier. So you'll choose whatever appropriate task it is. Okay, so next is the schedule component, which is not a new component, but you should update the estimated time frame for each task. So note that regulatory oversight and grant project management and possibly community engagement, that the estimated time frame will be the entire 2-year term of the grant. Okay, and last before we get to the budget detail is a new field called ECRG task status. So this includes ongoing, completed, and not started. So you'll need to indicate the status of each task, and similar to the schedule, regulatory oversight fees, as an example, will likely always be ongoing. As time progresses and you complete certain tasks, we ask that you return to this table to indicate those changes in this field. For example, if you complete the work associated with the work plan you listed as an ECRG task, you can come in to mark it as completed. This will help your portfolio managers keep track of the progress and should help your reimbursement requests be reviewed and approved more readily. Lastly is the budget detail, where you'll enter your cost estimates under the correct spending category per ECRG task. So I mentioned you have two options. The second option you have is to edit your existing breakdown to be in compliance with this new format. So you can edit any previous entry by clicking on the blue paper and pen symbol. Just like we looked at, it will open in a new window, and you can enter information into the new fields and adjust what was previously entered as needed. So I know this is a lot of information, but keep in mind that this training is being recorded, and we'll also provide a step-by-step guide for this realignment after the training is done. So with that, we're going to switch over to talk about the quarterly reports now. So from here, and when you log into Fluxx, you always use this menu bar on the left to navigate. And so to get to your quarterly reports, you will navigate down to Reports, Quarterly Reports. And so within the next week, you guys will find a blank quarterly report that you'll need to complete by the due date, which is going to be set to the 30th of the month that follows the close of each quarter. Your first quarterly report is due to DTSC on October 30th of this year. You can see administrative data here in the list view, as well as in the header when you click on a given record. So for those of you with multiple awards, again, you're going to want to make sure you're submitting against the correct site. Similar to the application, you'll need to enter edit mode in order to provide the requested information and upload any progress photos you might have. I'd like to take this time to remind you that the portal does not auto-save, so you're going to want to click on Save and Continue or Save often to make sure that it's keeping your progress. So with that, I will hand it over to Miriam to walk through the quarterly report content and provide some context for the information we're requesting.
Great. Thank you so much, Natasha. Can we just scroll down maybe to the impact question?
Sure.
Great. Thank you very much. And so I thought, I know it's a lot of information that Natasha has gone through, and everyone's going to have to jump into this report and digest it, take a little bit more time. So rather than, go through each question, I thought it'd be good for you to know why we wanted this question here. And I'll do that for some of them, and some of them are pretty straightforward. So for this impact question, we understand that you presented a certain narrative in your application, and that was the basis for us providing these funds to you. We are very often, very routinely asked, how we are helping communities, and we're always looking to harvest success stories or stories that show how this funding is helping a particular community. And so for us, this question, and the reason why this is the number one question, is because we want to understand from the time you presented your application, are there any updates? Are there any new stories or vignettes that you'd like to share with us? Sometimes it could be, a simple conversation. Sometimes it could be the impact of some funds that you were able to redirect because of the ECRG. And so this really is a space where we want to understand the human impact and the positive impact on your community. And so I know that might be tempting to put down, no change from from the last time, or refer to our application. But I just wanted you to understand why we placed this question first and foremost, because whenever it is possible and whenever you have something that you'd like to share with us, this is the space where we would like to see that. And I think the next question is about grantee project management. We understand that all of this funds, all of these funding is connected to effective project management. So we want to understand if you've had meetings or correspondence with DTSC staff regarding administration. And we want to know if our involvement and our engagement is productive and has helped advance the project. And if there's any issues that come up that need to still be resolved, this would be a good place to go ahead and document it. Of course, all of us are available to you. You can send me an email, set up time with me or any of the portfolio managers at any time. But if something remains unreported, this is a good place to go ahead and put that. Thanks, Natasha. And we won't go through this one by one, but there are some specific components that pertain only to community-wide assessment grantees. And we have 7 community-wide assessment grants. And these sections are things that if you have any issues at all with, I'd say discuss this directly with your portfolio manager, Tris Chesney. For anyone who's not part of this particular type of grant, I think you won't even see those questions. So our next question are environmental activities and regulatory oversight. So we want to have, a quick response on how this work is going and what activities are being conducted. We want to know if there have been any approved changes to the scope and schedule since last quarter, because that really helps us track projects and understand what's going on. And so that's something else that we want to know, when this was discussed, and also want to make sure that these changes have been approved. We also, like I said, are setting this up so we can do a lot of data mining. And that's why a lot of these boxes with numbers are important. So we want to have a sense of how many documents were submitted or were implemented or were approved. And we understand that largely a lot of this information may be available in some form on EnviroStore, and we recognize that. But these numbers are important for us because basically the kind of data pulls we're envisioning is someone's going to ask us, how many documents have you approved using ECRG funds, or how many cleanup plans have been approved by your regulatory agency. And so having these as numbers, once again, is really helpful in this broader performance tracking that we are being asked to do as part of being stewards of the ECRG. We also understand that regulatory project management and regulatory decision-making is a very key component to the success and the forward progress of the ECRG grants. And so we want to have a sense of how many times you're meeting, speaking, or talking with your regulatory oversight agency. And we want to know if these meetings are productive and have helped advance a project. And so any no answers here are going to be pulled up in our sweep, and we're going to be having more specific conversations with you as the grantee and also with the regulatory agency, whether it's DTSC or the water board or the local agency, to see how we can help propel these projects forward. And I think the question about timeliness of regulatory approvals also falls within that same vein and that same ethos that we're trying to create for ECRG projects. Community engagement is a really important aspect of the work that we're doing. And I know they weigh more heavily in some projects versus others, depending on the stage that you're at. And this is just another way that we want to track whether you've had meetings with community members or community groups, if you've published community updates or fact sheets about the project, and if there's been any updates regarding the reuse activities. We're sort of separating any updates you have on the technical aspects of the investigation or cleanup versus reuse, because both are important and they do begin working together. And if there's any different types of engagement activities, those are things that we want to know about. We're always on the lookout for communication with community-based groups or nonprofit organizations or community leaders. And if that happens, we want to understand who you're speaking with, because it helps us expand our footprint as well. And oftentimes there may be overlap, and that's something that we want to see if we can kind of harvest some further synergies from this information. This is simple and straightforward. If there's been any change in interest from community members, sometimes there are community members who are supporting a reuse. There may be some kind of change and maybe they're not supporting it anymore. Or, maybe there's a particular aspect of the project, whether it's the cleanup or whether it's the reuse, or actually in this case, the reuse, that they become sort of more interested in. And so those are kinds of signals for us to understand what's going on and maybe be a little bit more involved if we need to, or just be informed can be very helpful. Being informed can be very helpful for us. And then any updates or further definition to the reuse. In a lot of the applications, we may have seen that the reuse plans for park space, but the exact number of acres hadn't been decided yet. Or there is a number of houses or affordable homes that are being proposed, but the actual number may not have been available at the time the application was submitted. So this is a place to provide more detail as it becomes available. For equitable grant commitments, that's something that we are going to be working on for next time. If you remember, everyone had submitted equitable development commitments, metrics, and a schedule for reporting those metrics, and a way of measuring those metrics. So we're still working on that module, and tracking those metrics is something that we're going to try and do within the quarterly report format through Fluxx. And that's a relatively small piece, an update that we'll be introducing next quarter. As you know, competitive contracts is really important for us, especially bringing in contracts with special status. And so this is a place to report on that. And if there are new contracts, for us to understand what competitive process was used to bring these new contracts in. And then kind of revisiting prevailing wage, there's also a component for us to understand that that's being done, and this is a way to report that. Getting towards the end of the quarterly report, one of the things I wanted to remind everybody is that even though we process the reimbursement requests, we approve the packages. Once project management approves the reimbursement packages, it goes on to our contracts people, and the contracts people, once they approve it, they send a request to the state controller's office. The state controller's office are actually the ones who send the hard check to each one of you grantees. And we have no way of tracking when that check gets sent out and when it's received. And so we've just put a general question in here to understand if you've experienced any delays receiving your checks. And if the answer is yes to this, there's an option for you to provide some additional information, because our process of getting that check to you is not something that's held entirely within our organization. And so understanding if there are issues that are coming up from delayed checks, this data will allow us to follow up and see what we can do to help out. This is a place for to report on any delays of schedules. Some of them will be significant and some of them will impact your project and some of them won't. This is another trigger for us to follow up if needed. Changes in ownership is something that we are trying to keep track of, because we're not going to be changing our grantees from one owner to another, and ownership is an important thing for us to look into. And it ties to some of the questions we've asked in the actual agreement. So those are things that we need to be made aware of. If there are any changes to the site use, those are things that we need to be made aware of. And then I think over here there's some free response to understand if there are any challenges or barriers that aren't captured anywhere else in the quarterly report that we need to be made aware of. And then if there's any lawsuits pending for the ECRG funded site, that's something that our legal counsel want to be aware of, just to be prepared and develop some strategies on if needed. And the last couple of things in the quarterly report are just, we want to get a better sense of how long completion of the quarterly report is taking, because based on that, there's some adjustments that we may need to make. And then I think asking for photographs of community engagement, the environmental activities, any kind of reuse. These are things that we're trying to collect just to build like a better library of things that happen at these sites. And so I think with that, we are at the end of the quarterly report walkthrough.
Perfect. Thanks, Miriam. And so once you've entered all the information that we've requested in here, you can save and close the record. And from this screen, you'll be able to submit. So yeah, with that, that's the end of our presentation, and we can move towards Q&A.
Thank you, Natasha, and thank you for walking through all this material. I know it's quite a lot of information, but just a reminder that everyone will get these slides, and we still have some time before the due date for this first report. So that being said, just wanted to begin with some of the questions. And if you have any more questions, please either raise your hand or put it in the chat. But Travis, are you able to unmute yourself and ask your question regarding project type columns and some of the spending categories? I imagine if you're asking it, probably quite a few people are thinking about this.
Thanks, Sebastian. Yeah, this is Travis Beck with the City of Santa Cruz. Thank you for this informative presentation. The question I had was, within Fluxx, are all of the ECRG tasks available regardless of the grant type that we have?
Yes, they are.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you, Travis. John Yunay, are you able to unmute yourself and ask your question regarding, I think it was the project management costs and how the breakout of that works?
Hi, yes, I just wanted to make sure that I was doing the right work, looking at the right category for that 5% limitation, and had that correctly put into our future reports. And also sort of a sub question, we have a sub-consultant that that's not the right question. The question would be, obviously we'll be getting invoices in from consultants and other folks that have a much greater level of detail than we would probably put into these reports. We're going to obviously include that and have it available, but that's not required for any of the actual report summaries, is it?
Oh, I see. So you're asking about the quarterly report?
No, for the reimbursement reports, I'm sorry.
So within, when you're doing a cost reimbursement form, there are a specific set of facts that we need to see, and we did provide that in our presentation that was about a month ago. So if you visit our ECRG grantees website, you can find the presentation there that will give you the specifics of what is needed as documentation for the grantee project management cost. Did that answer your question?
Yes, yeah, I just want to make sure that the place for that was to make sure that our vendors had that all, but I just want to make sure it didn't have to be included on the summary cost reimbursement. I'll just leave it at that. Your presentation clarified a lot of the questions about what goes into the cost reimbursement instructions. So that's fine.
Okay,
Thank you.
good. Yeah, of course.
Okay, Aubrey Levine, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Sure, thank you. I was just curious, you mentioned the equitable development grant commitments. When you want to start, I think, tracking those until next quarter, or not this coming quarter, but the following one. Is that when we do start looking at those, is that something that DTSC is going to bring to our attention? Kind of, I'm guessing that each grantee made a different commitment. So are you going to roll in the project specific or grantee specific commitments, or should we dig those up and be prepared to kind of enter them in the report?
I'm going to go ahead and take this question. Thank you for asking your question. We actually have a master table right now that has all of our grantees and all of the commitments that they made and all of the metrics. If you recall, it was a specific table that you had to complete. So I would say don't worry about it right now. We're going to look into how best to do that. And I think that's why we weren't able to launch it, because I just had the idea yesterday and I didn't want to throw everybody off by trying to construct something new. And so I think what we're looking at is whether that's something each grantee is going to update into some sort of new Fluxx-based format, or whether that's something that we'll do ourselves and then you just report against it. So we're still figuring that out, but we'll let you know well ahead of time so you'll know what to be prepared for. But from what I'm seeing, and I'm looking at all the individual tables like in one big Excel sheet, it's not going to be a big effort. It's an insignificant effort compared to what we're asking you to do today.
Okay, thank you, Miriam. Jordan Wooden, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, mine's more general. So I joined, I'm from City of Los Angeles Department of Sanitation and Brownfields program. I joined this team after the application was submitted, and I still don't have access to, on my Fluxx account, it doesn't show any of our approved grants or anything, any of our active grants.
Gotcha. I can take this one. Thanks, Jordan, for your question. So if you were not listed as a contact on the application, you generally won't have access to it. And
Right.
the reason for that is because outside consultants, might be helping multiple grantees. And so they should only be given access to specific records. And so we can make that change for you.
Yeah, because I kind of need it.
Sure.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay. Does anyone else have any other questions? If so, please raise your hand. Otherwise, we may conclude the meeting a little bit early. Okay. Hearing none. Thank you, everybody, so much for your time and being able to join us today. Again, please follow up if there are any things that come to mind. I believe we'll share the recording via email once we have the link, but like you saw, the grantee resources is where we've been putting this material as well. Natasha, when do you think we'll be able to share these slides by?
I think by the end of this week.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, so please just hold on to some of your questions till the end of the week so that you have the slides and the materials and can review the categories. Of course, thinking about how this applies to the scope of your project. Thank you again. Hope you all have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.